Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel to another episode of the Road to the Master series. This is the episode number 75 in which I will cover the analysis of the round number 2 from the Cracovia Chess Festival. If you watched the last video on Friday, you know that the first game lasted for 5.5 hours, one of the longest game of my life. And what do you know, I will spoil it to you guys right at the beginning of this video, and I guess you know it by the length of the video, and this one was no different. Once again, I played more than 5 hours game, a long battle, and yeah, let's see how it went. So guys, as I've told you, because I drew in the first round with a lower rated player, in here I also got the player with the similar rating, this time though a little bit older one, so I guess it's good information from Poland. I kind of knew him, and yeah, let's see how did the game start, because I played d4. It's not that often that you can see me play d4 on the first move, but I had one specific idea in mind, which was to play for the Karlsbad structure. I saw only one game in this specific variation and structure of my opponent, but it was enough for me to try to go for it. c4, e6, knight c3, d5. This is the Queen's Gambit declined, let's say, transposition. In here I took on d5, played bishop g5, very solid, very common situation and variation. And at this very point, the two most obvious and most common moves are h6 and bishop e7. I am not really sure which one is played more often, but they are usually transposing into each other. The one I think gets more and more popularity these days is bishop f5, but my opponent chose bishop d6. And this exact move caught my eye, because even though I am no expert in the Karlsbad, I felt like this is some odd move by the looks of it, and I wanted to investigate, let's say, what is it about, what's the idea behind it, and so on. During my investigation, I discovered that my opponent does not play this variation in the most precise way either, so I said, okay, let's try it out. Maybe my opponent will play the very same thing as in the one and only game in the database, and it happened just like that. So what's the point of it all? Opponent, instead of going for bishop e7, h6, bishop h4, knight e4 kind of variation, pretty usual stuff with reduction of the amount of pieces on the board with plenty of exchanges and so on, plays bishop d6 and leaves all the pieces on the board. This was a choice I wanted to have too, so if my opponent wants to keep as many pieces as possible, I am happy for that too. I wish to outplay him in the middle game. So the game continued as followed: bishop d3, castle, queen c2, obvious stuff, right? h6, I went back, rook e8, knight g2, e2, knight d7, so pretty normal, everything around it. And here I played h3. The idea behind it is that thanks to the fact that I played knight e2 on the previous move, I am no longer scared of g5 because I cover the g3 square anyway, and with that move I have more flexibility on the king side, let's say, and I am not under any danger of some bishop h2 tricks, because if I have castled, then there are some ideas of bishop h2, king h2, knight g4 with the bishop hanging and so on. With the pawn on h3, it's just not possible. After that move, my opponent played knight f8, I now castled, and knight e6. And let's imagine that this is somewhat a starting position of the variation, but at the beginning of it I told you guys that my opponent is not playing it the very best way. Why was that? Well, the idea is that at the early stage, let's say, of the variation, so let's imagine somewhere around here, my opponent could have chosen the idea of knight a6, because with that move what he achieves is that he is attempting knight b4 with the fork, and if that happens I have to play a3 to cover it, and now he plays knight c7, knight e6, therefore he is faster, because 3 moves are required to go through this route, 3 moves are required to go through this route, but I have wasted my one tempo on a3. Small nuance, and maybe even I got it wrong in terms of the exact, let's say, move order, but this was the idea. So I said to myself, okay, if I can get to this position with one more tempo than I would normally get if my opponent played precisely, and if I will prepare what's going on further for the game, I mean, I'm happy, right? So in here, if I remember correctly, I was debating between two moves mostly, rook a to d1, rook a to e1. I was trying to figure out what were the differences, and I failed. I did not know it for sure. One thing I kind of deduced though was the fact that obviously with the knight on e2, the most obvious idea for me is to try to go for the pawn pushes in the center. And since e4 is so well prepared thanks to all of my pieces, I am not that worried about that, but sometimes with the e4 pawn push, I can be worried about the d4 pawn. So I deduced, okay, let's play rook a to d1, maybe it will be somewhat helpful. And basically this was the kind of position I got precisely on my board during the preparation. The only difference is that for some reason the a5 move was included too. So maybe with this knight a6 idea, black should have started this with a6, a5 actually. The point is that my opponent played bishop d7 in here, not a5, because a5 makes no sense if you want to go for the, let's say, active piece play around the center of the board. And if so, I was trying to debate what are the differences between this position with the bishop on d7 or with the position with pawn on a5. I didn't find any, to be honest, because both moves seem to not change that much since I will be playing on the king side mostly. So I continued with the very idea I've prepared anyway, which was f3, as I've told you guys previously. Now black plays very natural in here, knight g5, and the whole idea is that this knight maneuvered like this, so it's already his fourth move, and it's all about the e4 square, jumping there, the possibilities of going there, and so on. Thankfully, after f4, this is not a possibility because of this pin, so that's that. And also, I kind of did not make my homework precisely, because apparently in here computer suggests that knight h3 is the way to go. So 5 moves with the knight just to sacrifice right in front of the king. Pretty interesting idea. I just couldn't believe that this idea might work remotely or even being close to working, because it seems like all that opponent has for this knight are 2 pawns and not that obvious of the attack, but computer says some crazy lines wherever. Humanly speaking, it was rather fast for me to go for f4, and the same was for the opponent to go to e6. And as you may say, from this position to that, all I've got is the f4 pawn push, like for free. So yeah, why was that? And as I've pointed out, opponent is more willingly allowing me to go for the f4 pawn push rather than, let's say, e4 pawn push in this scenario. At this point though, I kind of stopped my preparation in a way, because I had a little bit some of the other variations to cover, and I felt like, okay, this is the good position, and I was preparing on lichess, and you know, when you make the moves, you see them on the board. This is the position I saw, kind of, because as I've said, there was the pawn, there was no bishop here, but it's very similar. And I just, you know, had the stockfish opened, and I saw the first line, right, like how it's going more or less. And I saw that what white is supposed to do is to play knight g3 and then e4, trying to open up the center on my terms and go for some activity, initiative, and so on. So I just felt, okay, let's go for it. Only after the game, my coach told me that it's not a good plan, because obviously a good plan in here is to play king h1, to play knight g1, knight f3, knight e5. And I was like, yeah, obviously, right? Because, yeah, I don't know why, but Stockfish suggested this knight g3. We will discuss it for a second in a second. But king h1 is the human way of playing, because the whole point of having this pawn on f4 is to have this very, very good outpost for the knight. And there are just problems with putting either that or that knight there. And king h1 is the solution to doing that, because then through g1, my knight would go to e5, and the difference is that even though stockfish-wise, let's say, it's a little bit worse, human-wise, it's much more better to navigate. Once I will plant this knight on e5, it's really, really hard for my opponent to deal with that. He cannot take it because I will open the f file. If the pressure is still there, I mean, there are obvious problems. If not, then I'm looking at a lot of squares, to be honest. I am closing down the center too, taking control over it. So practically speaking, there my opponent would have experienced more practical problems, because even though I go for the, let's say, objectively good line, practically I did not manage to navigate it well enough, because I indeed played knight g3 as the engine suggested. The point of it all also that I have to include is that after g5, which seems like it's trapping my bishop, right? Because knight on e6 is making its job to protect the pawn. I can take, and now I have a very important knight f5 jump, hitting the bishop, so I am not scared about mine. And if that happens, I mean, this king's position is compromised, right? Most of the pawns in front of it went further. I have the battery here, some pressure there, outpost there. The bishop will escape the attack and will be fine, so I'm basically crushing and winning. So this is the trick that my opponent, might have fallen into. He didn't do it for sure. I mean, yeah, he didn't do it. Obviously, he just went to f8. And funnily enough, this knight has made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves, even though it looks like it did just the 2. So you may argue that what black is doing is not the best, but at the same time, as I've told you guys, it's not that easy to break through. Now knight f5 will be met by simply exchanging it, because the bishop has not that many tasks and it would be happy to exchange it. And that's why I don't go for knight f5 in this variation. In this variation, I go for e4, because this is why one of the reasons why I've put the knight on g3. But after the exchange, it seems like I'm putting so much pressure to the opponent, but he goes back with yet another piece. And if you think about it, like how many backwards move did the black make, it seems like I should be winning, but it's actually not that easy. And computer actually starts to give less and less of an advantage with less and less of moves that I can choose from. And it just shows you that practically speaking, it was not easy to navigate, because what's the whole idea? I thought from the distance, unfortunately, that at this very moment, I can take on f6, and after bishop takes back, I can play knight d6, forking the rook and the pawn, not really allowing my opponent to take here, because there would be some nasty discoveries along the d-file along the way in the variation, so it cannot be played. And I thought that I am nearly winning, but opponent played the rook e7, and I was like, wait a second, can I actually take the pawn? Because if you think about it, after knight b7 there is now a check, with the idea that once I go away, doesn't matter really where, queen c7 might happen, or queen b6 maybe even, trying to both protect and attack. And like, yeah, my knight is not escaping, this pawn is also attacked. So yeah, queen b6 would be with the attempt of double attack, queen c7 would be focusing on the knight completely solely, because yeah, the knight is trapped. And yeah, I don't like this position, right? What is the price of this pawn? Even if I would find the bishop c4 move trying to discover the attack, c5 is incoming, and like, what's next, right? And I would have to find another brilliancy of rook takes d4, cd4, bishop f7, and I mean, come on. It's not that easy from this moment to see not only that I can take the pawn, because then I have the discovery attack once, then sacrifice of the exchange, then discovery attack twice. Like, come on, you would rather take the pawn, be happy about it, come back fast enough to not experience any problems, and that's that. So all of a sudden, taking the pawn makes not that much sense. And if so, what can I play, right? And in here, I just couldn't figure out what to do. I was mostly worried about those bishop d4 possibilities with a check and so on. So I have decided to be prophylactic, let's say, in a way, and I chose king h2 immediately, just to go away from the checks and all that stuff. But after bishop e6 that my opponent, I played king h1, bishop e6, the rook has opened the 7th rank. I mean, bishop has opened the 7th rank for the rook. My knight is attacked, my pawn is attacked, opponent's pieces are going upwards, I am going backwards, and all of a sudden I'm kind of worse. Practically, objectively, no idea what to do. So yeah, my initiative dried out. My opponent has the bishop pair. I have the isolated pawn. Control of the d5 square is purely opponent's. Yeah, what went wrong? What went wrong? I don't know. If you think about it, like at this point I have to go for e4. Once I am at that point, I kind of have to exchange the bishop on f6, because if not, the bishop is also not that great there. So what could I play here better? There is like only one line that computer suggests, f5. But why? I don't know. You would have to dig a lot deeper into the position. So all in all, my coach was right. At this very moment, this idea was indeed the easiest one and the one I should go for. This idea, I mean, not that easy to play. But alright, I need to face reality. At this very moment, I had to went back with the knight. The rook goes to d7, attacking my pawn. I had to exchange, and at this moment, it's move number 22, 23. My opponent had 5 to 10 minutes for the further 17, 18 moves until the time control. I had like half an hour maybe even less than that. But what to do? If you were me, what would you do? Please tell me, because I didn't know that well. Perhaps one idea that I underestimated and should have gone for is to play f5. Not really because I want to attack the opponent. Just in order to create a f4 square for my rook to protect the pawn, protect the entry point from the queen, and kind of say, okay, those two pawns are not the best in the world, but at least I'm holding them thanks to this good rook. And if so, I don't have problems, and maybe even I will still continue to do something active on the king side. But once, I had all this initiative and I got this position, it kind of felt wrong to go even further with my pieces. And on top of that, if I calculated every other option well enough and I knew that they are not working, I might have gone for f5. But in here, I chose knight e4. I thought I'm a genius because I'm hitting the queen, I'm threatening knight c5 with the fork here and there, and like it seems like I'm doing fine. The pawn cannot be taken because there is a trick of knight c5 now, hitting the rook, opening the diagonal with the knight jump, creating the, discovered attack possibility and this and that, everything well. If queen d8, this is passive, now I push f5, then I push f6 because the knight protected it, right, and so on. But queen h4, making use of my weak dark squares, not precisely around the king, but near it, let's say. f5 now is not so powerful because with this bishop and with this queen and with this rook, the pressure towards my center knight and pawn is kind of a big one. f6 is not making that big of a deal. g6 is incoming, the knight will get activated, the rook will get activated. I have no more play, no more idea what to do. So if f5 is not working, let's check knight c5, right? And now the problem with this move is that rook e7 exists protecting the bishop, and I am not that keen on exchanging those light pieces specifically, because even though the bishop is kind of strong, I don't want to make this knight strong either with the exchange, right? So yeah, practically speaking, plenty of problems. Queen h4 indeed solidifies black's advantage, and what can I do? I played knight c5 anyway, rook e7, and I told you guys about this time difference because in here I spent more and more time trying to figure out what to do, and I didn't really have a clear idea what to do. My opponent has the simplest job of all. As of now, all he wants to do is probably, most likely, place the bishop there on the biggest diagonal towards my king, on the square that blocks my isolated pawn. Perhaps later on he will either try to solidify the bishop with the rook or double stack the rooks along the e-file. Then he will try to make its knight position better. Easy choices, obvious choices, not so much of calculation, just cruising through the position because it's so good strategically, while I on the other hand am not sure. Should I take and change the situation or not? Should I push the pawn even further and bluff a little bit that I am still doing fine or not? Should I try to exchange the queens or not? Like all the questions without the obvious answers, and usually it makes sense to say that yeah, I'm practically much worse, objectively, unfortunately too. Anyway, going further, the scenario happened as I told you guys. I played some move, I cannot even recall why and what for exactly. He played bishop d5. I tried to exchange it with the creation of the isolated pawn of his 2, that's why he chose rook d8. Now I pushed f5 trying to stop entry points for the knight, so the knight goes through the dark squares trying to activate itself. And what can I tell you guys, this knight seems out of place, this exchange cannot be executed properly as I would like it to. My king does not look so great, so I thought that okay, it's not the best idea to try to exchange pieces when my opponent is so low on time, but I have to do it. I have to at least release some tension in the position, try to exchange the queens most probably, trying to go into some kind of endgame with not so many problems regarding the king and so on. So I have decided that I want to play queen f2 and exchange the queens, but I cannot do it immediately because my bishop would be hanging. So in order to execute that, I would have to take on d5 and then play queen f2. I was just slightly worried then that this rook activated so well that both my pawns are attacked, and I was unsure whether or not I will be actually able to keep them. So I kind of make the scene of a similar manner that I made in the previous game, because in the previous game, if you remember, just before time control, I pushed the pawn in front of my king. In here I did very same thing, because it's a g3 move that I chose, and after he went away I pushed g4, and after he went back, now I went for this idea of takes queen f2, because I felt like this inclusion of the pawn to g4 move will make my pawn structure better, therefore I am more, let's say, prepared towards the queen's exchange. However, that's not really true, because even though it might have happened, it's not that better version of me if we compare this position to, let's say, that one. Because when you think about this and that position, yes, in here the pawn is, let's say, more lonely, in here it's not, but at the same time h5 might be the way to go for the opponent, trying to undermine this pawn chain. You never know whether it was actually a good inclusion, that's first of all. Second of all, in this very position, without this pawn being pushed, queen f2 from my opponent makes a little bit more sense. So I had, let's say, more guarantee of exchanging the queens. At this moment, when I have the pawn on g4 like in the game, it's not really that tempting for him to exchange the queens because I have weakened my king. Makes sense. Therefore, he just goes back. I now know that this pawn is in for the long and painful death. So instead of trying to put all my forces to protection, I decided to go for some activity because I've spotted that this king has some problems with the back rank. So I chose rook f2 e1, kind of inviting my opponent into this, and let's say that, because finally I would have achieved what I wanted. So takes, some activity, and on top of that I would actually take the pawn on b7, because one thing that is good about my position, one and only, is that in here, even though I told you guys a few months back that this knight is out of place, out of game, at least it attacks the pawn, kind of tying the rook to the defense of it. Obviously b6 might be in the air in the near future, that's why also I had to react rather quickly. So rook f2 e1 it is. And yeah, in here probably the way to go for my opponent should have been a tactic one, let's say. So rook e1, queen d8 with this battery. And the point of it all is that after knight b7, now my knight is simply lost because of double attack. And if so, I cannot take the pawn. And if so, b6 will be played on the next move. Queen covered the back rank weakness, created the battery towards my isolated pawn. I am losing, maybe sooner, maybe later, but I am losing. That's the problem. However, obviously, I told you guys that already 10 moves back, my opponent had around 5 minutes. So in here he had around 1 or 2. So it's not that easy to spot from the distance, especially this double attack with the queen. Therefore, he went for an, let's say, obvious choice, human choice of queen d6 check, trying to protect the rook and prepare b6 while giving a check and while maintaining some pressure towards the pawn and so on, so on. But I now have queen g3, once again begging the opponent to exchange the queens, and thankfully he did just that. Not yet, because he firstly took on e1, I took back, and only now he took on g3. Because it's not that easy for him to deal with this pawn. This is the only thing that basically saved my game. In order to not lose the pawn, he actually had to kind of exchange. And now if we go into this variation, we basically get this very same position that I showed you guys before, just with the very small difference of my king being placed a little bit differently, maybe even a little bit better. And on top of that, funnily enough, at this very point, I did not see the move. I calculated the variation with knight b7, but computer says that knight e6 wins on the spot. Because we are hitting there and there, obviously the pawn will take us then. But after f e6, we have the deadly weapon of e7 pawn push, and thanks to the spin, we'll be getting very good amount of the material, and we will be winning the game. Obviously, I would not have found that with so little time, or I would have gone for that one. But in here, I got rid of my weakness. I took the pawn that made those pawns weaker. I have the activity, so I am the one with the hopes of winning. For those reasons, after king g3, my opponent played knight f6 first to activate the knight and not allow that one. But thankfully, I had a privilege to take the pawn while my is taken, so at least I was not lost. At least the material situation was equal. On top of that, if I go back to c5, I am not allowing some double attacks towards my pawn and so on. And after rook d2, rook e7, I also get myself some activity. This is the move number 39, so opponent has to make 2 more moves with basically 0 minutes on the clock, just the increment is working for him. And I believe in here he made an inaccuracy, because he should have just taken the pawn as fast as possible, and if I take this one, he can now try to, let's say, play with a tempo to my knight, kick it away, then try to either check me like this, or maybe activate the knight, or maybe create some counterplay with his c-pawn. This seemed just much more natural, at least in my eyes. But in the time trouble, you know, everything can happen. He thought he will be smart with rook c2 move first, because obviously if I now try to protect it like that, rook a2 protects the pawn, right? So that's the problem. And yeah, this was his idea, but I have knight d3 protecting the pawn. Pawn protects the c3 square, so there are no, let's say, pins along this rank. And if so, I am happy. On top of that, at some points, I might even sacrifice those 2 pawns, because I have knight e5 getting this pawn, and maybe, just maybe, creating something at opponent's king. I knew that it will probably not work as well as I would like it to, because if we imagine a variation of, let's say, a5, knight e5, here, 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 so like I am giving up those 2 pawns because I want to do it like that. He pushes, I go back, he pushes, I check, here, here. This is the checkmate pattern I wanted, right, with rook h8 being checkmate. First of all, knight g8 simply stops it all, and I'm not sure if I am okay with the fact that the pawn of the opponent has pushed so much. Second of all, I also had, let's say, another idea of giving a check first and then taking here. But once more, knight g8 is good enough. Maybe g6 is even better because the knight is not blocking this square now. So should I go for it? Should I allow the counterplay? I was not so sure about it. So yeah, after knight d3, a5, when it happened on the board, I thought to myself, okay, this attempt of the attack to the king was a nice addition. Maybe it's something to worry about for my opponent. I will try to play it simple, because if you think about it, the most likely outcome on the queen side is that at some point I should be able to get this pawn for that one, leaving me with this pawn for that one. So this is the passed pawn and this one is 2, but mine is the outside one, more further away from all the pieces. So I thought, okay, this might be my, let's say, outside chance for a win. So instead of trying to do anything on the f7 square, I went to rook a7, hitting the pawn. My opponent now, correctly actually, felt like activating the knight is the good choice, and he chose knight e3, e4 check. If I go there, I might get myself into trouble with some checkmating patterns. I don't want to go there ever. So the only 2 choices I have is there or there. King f3 seems simply wrong because of knight g5 check, and I didn't know if I am that happy about giving up the pawn with the knights still on the board, but maybe I should have considered it deeper, but I thought that my choice is obvious because I played king f4, not allowing the knight to check me anymore, allowing knight f2 though, which would be not possible with my king on f3, hitting my knight, hitting my pawn, but I was happy about it because after the exchange I have king e5, and I said to myself, okay, if this is the scenario I thought will happen, and indeed it did, so rook b2, rook a5, I at least give myself the outside chance of winning the position because of my active king and the outside passed pawn. So I liked my chances here more than in this very moment, because I could have played like this, let's say, but with the knights I was unsure. Without the knights I was more sure, objectively less chances for a win, practically, I don't know. Anyway, funny thing is that if you remember, I told you guys in the middle game that my opponent has all the easy choices and I did not. In here the position, the dynamic completely switched. I have easy choices. I will just try to go to the pawn, push the pawn, play like this, like this, like that, here, 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 here. And my opponent has to decide, should he try to defend the pawn, should he try to cut away my king, should he go for one pawn and then try to defend, like somehow, should he go for the one pawn, second pawn and then try to defend. Maybe he can try to run with the king there. Maybe instead of trying to take the pawn first, one or the other or both, he has to undermine my pawn structure there. So all of the questions, not really any good answer. Even if he had the stockfish, it would not help him either because it's like 0.00 evaluation after 6 different moves, but obviously some are drawing easier, some are drawing just for the engine, not a human, right? So practically speaking, tough position and situation for my opponent, and even though we are just after the time control and he has additional half an hour to think about it all, he basically uses the time, thinks about it, is unsure, the time is ticking, and I am on the other hand playing, quite fast. So, how did the game continue? He went for rook h2, obvious move, and perhaps I would go for that too. As I've said, I push the pawn, easy choice. He takes my pawn. Now I play rook c5, trying to create somewhat of a shield with the rook, preparing both the king run and the pawn push. That's why at this very moment I felt like this is the most critical situation of all for the opponent, because as I've said, in here he has the choice of playing here, here and only then there, playing there immediately, or trying to give me a check, asking should I go here and he goes back for the pawn, or should he go there to cut away my king. During the game I thought that this is the good way for him to play because he attacks both my pawns, but then I kind of now don't know what am I even thinking, what I was thinking in here, because this is exactly what I wanted, pawn push and the king push too, because the opponent is simply kind of too slow to stop me. I will just play here, 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 create a shield, and that's that. So even though he took this additional pawn, it was not enough for him to create counterplay, because if he starts pushing h5 pawn, I am faster. And maybe this is something I did not calculate the most precise way, because yeah, it's just that I am winning with one and only move, but it's so obvious that I had to miscalculate something along the way. And it just shows you that it's the difficulty of the Rook endgames, because in the moment like this, whether you play here, here, here or there, you have to decide it not based on intuition, not based on the calculation for some time. You basically have to go till the end, to the promotion or no promotion, right? Kind of thing. So yeah, that's the difficulty. My opponent went for rook a3. So he did not waste any time on stopping my king or checking my king or going for this pawn, which is okay decision, because he just says, okay, I took this pawn, right? And I just want to create a passer there, and with my king I want to go for the king side activity. That's okay. I played a5 obviously, he chose g6. I took, he took, I chose king d6, realizing my idea basically. He pushed the king forward, I took the pawn, and I believe that his biggest problem as of now is that my rook controls not only the pawn of mine, but also the pawns of his. And on top of that, the cherry on the top actually is that it covers the king. So my rook is amazingly placed in here. I loved it basically there. And that's why I feel like previously, somewhere at this point, maybe some h5 ideas would be on the menu too. Maybe even like a move earlier or something. Like, yeah, I just couldn't figure out for my opponent. I let him waste the time, use the time. I was chilling, knowing that he has all the nasty and difficult decisions to make, and I was like cruising, you know, got to this position. Let's see what it offers me. Because one thing is trying to calculate everything till the end when you're unsure what to do. For me, I was sure what to do. It was very natural to me to play out those moves. Is it winning or not? I don't know, and I don't care, we will find out, because I couldn't have played any better idea, any better, you know, plan, so like, why bother? I just played the best move possible in the position, let's see is it winning or not. In here it's not winning yet, but we are getting to the stage where black is actually relying on one and only choices, ideas and moves. King e7 was way to go. Funnily enough, I told you guys that he should be trying to go for some kingside activity, but as I've said, this move is not possible, therefore he has to run with the king towards my a pawn. Now I chose rook b5, covering the b file, preparing obvious plan, yet again, obvious plan, obvious idea, obvious move, king b7, a6, a7, a8. Easy. And in here already there is only one and only move, one and only idea that might draw the game for black. And it's that of rook c3 check, with the idea that if I indeed go for my obvious, let's say, idea, after king b7, king d7, a6, he starts giving me checks. And if I go along the b7, b8 squares, or even b6, he's basically checking me continuously. The only idea of mine to try to go for a win would be perhaps to go for the king b7, rook c7, king a8, so that after a check I have rook b8, right? And then try to go like that, let's say, but he has king c7 attacking my rook. If I accept, I am basically trapped in here, and if I don't accept, I am trapped too. Basically after g5, I have one legal move, one and only. This is all blocked, this is pinned, so I have to take the rook, ending the game in a draw 2. So I cannot do it in that way, and it's already hard in itself to see that. What's even harder is this specific move, because it's a very obvious idea of mine to try to go for that move. The idea now is that after rook c2, if I push a7, he goes with the king, enters the c file, because it's usually the biggest thing in the endgames against the pawn on the edge of the board, to get the king of the defensive side to the c or f file, let's say. Because if I now push, there is a check and he collects the pawn, I mean now the queen. So it's uneasy for sure. And on top of that, if I spot that after a7 there is king c7, in here I can maybe, should I? I mean, can I try something different? Maybe not actually. So yeah, this is the idea for the opponent to draw the game. So kind of crazy, obviously not that easy. And yeah, it will require the knowledge of the endgame specifically, the calculation in the time trouble, like all the factors, all the factors. My opponent did not find it all. He just played h5, because if I take and take, which obviously happened in the game, if I now go for rook takes h5, he can play king d8 with the hopes of getting king closer to the situation. And I have the problem, because if I will try to go like this and that, I am in no time to do that. The king stops me from entering the situation, and when king is so close, it's always a draw. If I check and try to kick away the king yet again, the pawn is the problem. So if I go here, he can check me, here, there, here, there. If I go there, king is closer, closer and closer. It's a draw once more. If I have played this move, he once again checks me, checks me, checks me, as long as I will go on those files. If I go there, he just simply pushes the king towards the c7 square and so on. So at this moment, after I would take the pawn, I have no good way to either stop the king from going there or stop the checks from going like that. That's more or less the situation. And also, if I would like to do it that way, no, it's also this, right? Anyway, easier choice, because I'm not sure if this changes something. Like, what's the difference between this variation and the one when we had the king here? Oh, okay, there is the idea that also I had used in the game, so I will not spoil it to you guys. I now see it. Okay. Anyway, going back, at this moment, I couldn't take the pawn because of the reasons I told you guys. So I played king b7. As previously said, I'm basically doing all the pre-moves according to plan from like 10 moves all the time. He pushes h4, I push h6, he pushes a3, I push a7, he pushes h2, and now I have one and only winning move, which is not rook b1. That seems the most obvious one because I am at the same time protecting the king and the promotion, but this is the problem. At the same time, this rook is overloaded. If you ever solve some tactics, you will know what overload means in chess. Rook b3 check is incoming, and unfortunately, if I take the rook, the queen is there first with a check, so I cannot win this game for sure. And if I would, say, okay, you got it, I can even play king a8 and make my own, let's say, stalemate, funnily enough. But obviously I didn't want that, I wanted to win, so instead of going for rook b1, I went for rook h5, trying to stop the promotion because this is the most important thing in the world. What am I not stopping are the checks, but thankfully I am okay with them. So he checks, I go away, he checks, I go away, he checks, I go away. If he now goes for rook c3 check, I have king b4, so he is unable to go back there. So this is very, very good for me. The only choice of his to stop anything going would be to play rook c8. But now I'm winning thanks to, everything working out one move by one, tempo by tempo, because I can take the pawn. If he attacks mine, I can just push the king because the pawn cannot be taken. All right. And if he pushes the king, I go here and there. If he changes, and if he goes like king d6 first, I can basically play there too, because he cannot play like this because of the check, takes, and queening. So in every variation, I will be just on time to either exchange the rooks or give a check or protect my pawn with the king, and I'm winning. Therefore, rook c3 check made no sense. Rook a3 was the way to go for sure. And this is it, guys. This is my idea to win. Rook h2 can be played. The pawn is, let's say, poisoned because now I am using the skewer to win the rook and the game. Amazing stuff. And this is kind of the scenario I told you was the difference between there and there, this and that position, because in here I can push the pawn, and after the check I can just simply run away, because if after this I have a7 with the promotion, and in here there is the very similar skewer. So first I forgot about this idea, even though I executed in the game myself. So this just kind of shows you why this endgame was so tough, because you had to be precise in every given variation. But yeah, going back to the game, as I've said, I took the pawn, therefore my pawn cannot be taken. And the problem is that even though I told you guys that the king of black is supposed to, let's say, go closer and closer to the pawn, the problem for him is that if he goes there, obviously I can give a check and promote, so he has to go to d7. But now I can play rook h8 once more with the hopes of promotion, and once my pawn is taken, I go here. Skewer yet again, the very same stuff. For those reasons, all of them, he has no good useful move in here. He has to go to e6 to avoid those problems along the 7th and 8th rank, but as of now I play rook h7, and now I am not only cutting away the king, as in the previous variation I showed you, but I am doing that in a way that protects my pawn. This is a big thing for me. So the king is stuck, my pawn is protected, so the only hope that he might have is to try to start checking me. But if we compare again this position to that one, in here this rook was on the 8th rank, in the game it's on the 7th rank, and this makes a huge chance, a huge change because after rook a1, king c6, something, king b7, something, king c8, I will cover the checks on the 7th rank. And I was unable to do it when the rook was on the 8th rank, and that's how I am winning. At this moment my opponent resigned, but the live board also caught this move, let's say, but it makes no difference. Obviously I won. So, roller coaster of the emotions yet again, all of the variations of the ideas, of the executions. Like, I was hoping I will win the game rather not, let's say, easily, but fast, thanks to the amazing preparation. It turned out that my opening preparation was fine, but my middle game preparation was very, very bad. I didn't know what to do, how to navigate it, and so on. Then I got myself practically even maybe kind of lost position. In the time travel, I managed to equalize it. After the time travel, I managed to squeeze the game, to how do you say it in English? Squeeze the water out of the stone, I guess, and I won. So even though I had two over 5 hours games, and I had 1.5 points out of 2 games, I felt like I deserved half of the point. But I will take it, additional point is always welcomed, and I was exhausted but very, very happy and thankful for the win that you just saw. And yeah, hopeful to get a better player in the round number 3, even though if black pieces, I was ready for the challenge. Did it happen? Though you will see tomorrow. Thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to leave a like. And yeah, we'll see each other with the analysis of the next round, hopefully with such a smile on my face too. As of now, thank you all for watching. Bye bye.